So I tend to get a lot of questions about AREDN and the network and how it works, and a lot of them have to deal with how do you port forward, how do you advertise your services, how do you find this, how do you find this, how do you just go across the network. So what I've decided to do is show you guys a little bit around our network, and I'm going to move through one of the nodes, the one here at my house, and just kind of show you some of the different windows, some of the different things you can do, where the settings are, things like that, and hopefully that'll help you out. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask in the comment section. Otherwise, you can also contact me or check us out on the AREDN Facebook page, or even the Wisconsin Mesh Networking page as well, and ask any questions there. And this will be a relatively short video, but we're definitely going to be doing more videos on maybe a little bit more in depth on some of the different pages, maybe port forwarding, things like that, just for the little bit more advanced setups that you may do. But it's definitely, once you get into some of those more advanced things, you definitely want to know what you're doing, not change a lot of things without knowing how it's going to affect your network and how it's going to affect that node and the devices that are connected to it. So let's dive right in. Alright, so once you get your node all set up and the AREDN firmware set up on the actual Ubiquiti device, no matter, depending on what it is, you'll typically come to a landing page like this. Now, right now you'll see my call sign on this. The one difference you'll see with an initial setup is it'll actually say no call, and it'll ask you to set that up. So we're a little bit further down the road, but I just wanted to kind of show you where things are at, what things mean, things like that. So when you go to someone's node, whether it's yours or someone else's, this is where you'll start. So this is the dashboard. So you'll see your menu items up across the top. The refresh, it's just kind of telling you the status, because some of the stuff could change here, like your signal to noise ratio. This is basing it off of the strongest connected client. So, and that's wireless. So other nodes that are out there that are able to talk to this via RF. You also see the Wi-Fi address. So that's the address over the air between the nodes. Then the LAN address, this is the one that anything that's plugged into this node, like this computer, which is plugged into this node, this is the address I need to type in order to get to the node. Now you can also do the node address, KC0WKP-1 dot local node dot for port 8080. However, you can also use this LAN address as well, and that's something good to keep in mind if you're going to start setting static IPs on cameras or some type of phone server or things like that, because this is going to be your gateway IP for that. So now you see the WAN address. So right now I have this node. It is set up with a managed switch, and it allows it to connect to the internet. So this is the address on my home network side that the node is accessible by and looks to. So, and then the default gateway, which is my home router here. So now, if you want to connect your node to the internet or use the tunnel servers and things that need an internet connection, you need to have a managed switch. You can't just plug it into your home network. It won't work, because you have to have something that is going to allow the routing of traffic between the 10 network and the 192 or whatever your home network is. So they're going to look at each other different. The subnets are different. It won't work if you just plug it in without a managed IP. There's very good instructions right on the AREDN webpage, step-by-step instructions, very simple instructions for several of the preferred managed switch by Netgear, Ubiquiti, and I believe the TP-Link ones are on there as well. So if you need to use the tunnel server or connect it to the internet, you really need to do that. So some of the other things you'll see on here, you'll see the firmware version. Right now the current release is 3.16.1.1. There are some nightly builds out there that are in the 3.17. However, they are not there's potentially known bugs, things like that in them. However, certain hardware versions, depending on what device you have, you may need to use that nightly build if your device that you have purchased is not supported yet with a release version. So we see the uptime. So this has been up for 4 days, 19 hours. You see the load average, system time, and then the free space. So every device out there, whether it be a nanostation, a bullet, or a rocket, they all have different memory sizes, and that can be very important, especially if you want to put applications on the node itself versus in a device such as a computer or Raspberry Pi, and if you're doing tunnels. Rockets typically have the highest amount of memory, but and bullets and nanostations are lower. So you got to make sure that you're not going to use up all the memory, because it'll cause your node to lock up and other issues and just things to be aware of. So first, we'll look at the charts here. It's just a quick way of viewing your signal to noise ratio, so we can look at our strongest signal, or we can choose which of our devices we want to see the connection between. Right now this node is quite a ways away from any one of these, so that's why the signals are so low, but that's just kind of what we're doing as we build our network. So you got to start somewhere. Next we'll go to the mesh status. Mesh status, what this is going to show you is every node that we can actually get to. So right now, under the local host, this is anything that is on this node in particular. So right now I have a few services that I've advertised. I have a web page that I can just click here to go to, and anybody that goes to the status page can see this. So this is a way to let other people know what's going on my node. I have the mesh chat here. It's one of the applications you can put either on the node, or I'm running it off a Raspberry Pi. It's just a chat client that allows us to chat across do instant messaging, share some files, things like that. Very light program, works really well. Then I have a couple cameras here. I have one here that I'm advertised. I have another one here that I just put on a couple days ago, and I haven't built the advertised address here yet. So, and then we'll see current neighbors over here. So current neighbors, that is anything that is connected directly to this node via either RF or tunnel. And you'll also see anything, if I have a node that's connected via Cat5, you'll see it here as well, but it'll say D2D. That means device to device. And so those will show up here as well. So I can go to any one of these nodes just by clicking on them, or I can click any of their services that they've advertised. Now I can do the same thing right now with these nodes here. So these are remote nodes, and what that means is it's something that it's not directly connected to me, but I can get to it via one of these connections. So it might be one hop down the road, it might be 2 or 3 hops down the road. Now one thing I noticed here is one of my tunnels is down. I have a tunnel out to California that usually this list is over 100 entries long, so I'll have to check that out if that's on my end or on their end. So that happens every once in a while. The tunnels aren't perfect, so but I'll show you one thing you can do is just by clicking on this, it'll take me right to this. So now I'm on the dashboard page of the shop node. I can either click the back button or go back to mesh status and click KC0WKP1, and now I'm back at that node. So very quick, and that was through an RF link. You know, that's a pretty quick and very responsive just to get across those nodes there. So the next tab here is OLS R, and what this is this is what runs the mesh. This is what how the mesh figures out what traffic to send where, how to get it there. Because if you think about it, if you have 5 nodes all connected to each other and they can all see each other, that doesn't mean that each route is the best route. You know, it's going to figure out what the best route is based off of several factors. The our network quality or the network link quality, the actual what they calculate something called cost, and I'll do another video just on OLS R because it can get rather complex very quick, especially if you got a big network. So, but it works well, and it's basically the brains behind the mesh network. So, I will go back to the dashboard, and then we'll go to Wi-Fi scan. This can be useful, especially if you're setting up your network and you want to see what other stuff is on different channels out there. Especially if you're going to use channels that aren't in the ham band, it can be useful to see how much other RF interference you might encounter, and so you can choose your channels wisely and not run into any issues of RF interference. Not saying you won't run into them, but you can help mitigate it. But it's kind of nice just to see it. Now, one thing this will only show you other devices that are out there that are using the same channel width that you are. So right now we're using the 10 meg channel width, which is very narrow, and Wi-Fi routers and things like that only use a 20 and a 40. So we won't actually see those, but if we switched it to 20, we would see a lot of routers and things like that too. So go back to the dashboard, and now we'll go into the setup. Actually, before we do that, the last thing here is you'll see a theme here. If you want, you can change the theme. It just changes the color setup, things like that. I usually just kind of leave it default, but you could play with it as you will, and make it your own. So now we'll go into setup. It'll ask you for your username and password. The username is always root. However, when you set up your node, it will have you set up a password as well. So when you get into your settings, this is typically what you're going to see. You'll see your addresses here. You'll see your SSID, channel width, your transmit power, your LAN settings, and your WAN settings. Now, under your IP address, you don't want to change this. Don't change this unless you really know what you're doing, because this is all pre-calculated based off the MAC address of the device, and it's all designed to be seamless on the networks and not to interfere with each other, not to have duplicate IPs out there, and so the routing actually happens properly. So unless you understand what you're changing, don't change it, especially with the IP addresses. The things you're going to want to set up is the AREDN SSID. That is the standard, that's the default SSID, and we've chosen to leave ours at that for now. Some areas have multiple SSIDs for different functions. You might have an SSID just for your Aries group. You might have an SSID just for fun. Different things. Especially when there's a lot of mesh stuff going on, they'll create additional SSIDs for different functions, and that way they can dedicate certain ones for certain needs. We leave it at this just for ease of use at this point, and anything that sees this SSID that matches this channel and channel width, it'll automatically connect. So you can choose your channel. Keep in mind, anything 1 through 11, that is where all your Wi-Fi routers and things like that are going to be. So you're going to run into a lot more interference potentially. And then we choose our channel width. We've chosen 10 meg. It's kind of a good happy medium. You can still get some good data through it. However, you can get a little more distance out of it. And you're not seeing as much of the... You're not seeing as many channels as well, so you're going to have overlap. If you look at these frequencies here, you're going to go 5 meg up and 5 meg down from this center frequency, 2397. So keeping that in mind, we're going to if we're only going to go up to 2402 is going to be our upper edge, and that way we're not overlapping into the Wi-Fi channels at all, and we'll see less interference. LAN, you can change this however you want. I would advise that you don't change it to anything that you're going to change the IPs unless, again, you know what you're doing. 5 hosts and 13 hosts and 1 host. Now what this is gonna change your IP, but it's also gonna change how many devices you can have connected directly to your node. Now if you set it to 5 hosts, that only gives you 5 IPs that you can actually connect to. So I could have 5 devices connected to it, whether it's a computer, a camera, or what have you. If I change it to 13, I can have 13, and so on. So it's something to keep in mind. Typically, most nodes, you're not going to have too many devices connected to it. And then DHCP server. That means that anything I hook up to it, up to the node, it's going to assign it an address within this range here. So starting at 226 and ending at 230. So those are the 5 IPs: 226, 27, 28, 29, and 30. Static IP, so if you set up a managed switch to allow your node and mesh network to have internet access, this is what you would set up. So this is the IP addressing scheme for my home network. So I've assigned that the node .25, and then it's looking at .1, and this is through the VLAN that's set up in that managed switch. So, and then DNS servers and so on. So down here at the bottom, you'll see the optional settings for the longitude and latitude. What you can do is you can put in the location for this node and then upload it to the AREDN servers. And what this will do is this will populate it out on the AREDN web page. There's a map, and so it'll show the name of your node, the channel it's on, and the SSID. And it's just kind of a cool thing. That way, if someone's going on there and saying, "Hey, where's there other nodes around me?" they can look on there. Hey, there's one. I try pointing at it and seeing if I connect to it. So next at the top, well, I guess I also forgot to put. Now there's a few different types of node types. From my understanding, I'd have to look at my other node, but in the latest firmware that's going to be released here, 3.17, they removed it to just say mesh node. You could set up some different things, but mesh node is typically what you want the node type to be at. That is the point of this firmware. If you want to do an access point or a client or what have you, leave it at the Ubiquiti firmware and use that there. This is the mesh node. This is what it was designed for, was creating your redundant linked network. Node name, that's just the name. That's not the SSID. That's just the name of your node. So you can name it whatever you want. Typically we put our call signs on it, but that is completely up to you. Next tab over here, we'll do port forwarding, DHCP, and services. So you'll see in here I got a lot of different services in here, a lot of reservations. So if you make a reservation in here at all, it will save that per the MAC address, and it will not allow another computer to have any of these addresses. So right now you can see all of these are saved, so the only one available is 226, which is also on a lease, and well, that'd be it, because I only have up to 5 addresses I can use. Then over here you'll see advertised services. So how you do this is you reserve an address, like Raspberry Pi right here, and then from this drop down you choose which one that you want to advertise, and then a port. So these two are just off of the HTTP port. Excuse me. These two are just using port 80, and the first one is the web page, my web page, and so it just needs to go to port 80 at the Raspberry Pi, and then it will populate that on the mesh status page as a service. Then this one, mesh chat, is on the subdirectory mesh chat, so it'll send anybody that clicks on that right to the mesh chat. Now I also have a camera on top of the tower, and I just have choose tower cam here, and that will send them to this address at this port, which is the web address or the web server port. Now in this name, this is what it's going to show on the mesh status. So if you see here, it's kind of long in what I wrote in here, but I wrote tower cam user AREDN, password AREDN, and then use IE. So that way any users out there know what the username and password is for the tower cam. And I put use IE in there because I found that Internet Explorer is like the only one that really works well with the plugins, and that's another topic for another day. So AREDN is a pretty typical username and password that have been kind of used across the networks for the cameras. It's just a user account I created in the camera that's got limited functionality, basically can only view the camera. That way anybody that accesses it cannot change any settings and kind of mess up the camera. So down at the bottom you'll see the port forwarding. So these are ports that if I'm on my home network side, it allows me to access certain things that are on my node. So I can access the Raspberry Pi or a computer or whatever I want. You know, it'd be the same thing. So if I type in 192.168.1.25 port 8000, it'll take me to my web page on the Raspberry Pi at port 80. So something different you can set up. It won't let you do a lot more than that. There's, you know, if you're really creative with your routing and things like that, you can do a lot of things, but a lot of it's just, you know, a way to check on it without actually jumping on the computer that I have dedicated to the AREDN node. So next we'll go over to the tunnel server. This is where I host tunnels for other people to connect to. So I have two people connecting to this server. Gentleman down in Madison and a gentleman on the other side of town that doesn't have a good RF link to us yet. And basically you just set up what their name of their node is. So NINUDO home, and then you issue them a password, or they can choose a password, and then they need to have the network address. And so you'll see that both of these are active. When you do set them up, you can actually just click here and it'll start an email details, so it'll give you all that credentials that you can just send to them so they can put it right into their node. The next area is the tunnel client. So this would be you connecting to someone else's network. So this is a tunnel server I have out to California. So this is the server address instead of an IP. So this would typically be someone's public IP, or maybe they have some type of web address that they have forwarded to their public IP, and this gentleman has done that, so he's hosting everything at this web address, password that I chose, and then the network IP number that he has issued me. And then you'll see that it's active right here. Then I can enable and disable them here, so just by unchecking this box, it'll just drop that link temporarily, and then if I want to bring that connection back up, all I have to do is recheck it and save the changes. The last tab here is administration. Administration, this is where you do your firmware update. You can upload different packages and do shared keys, as well as download support data. Most of the stuff in here, other than the firmware update, you probably won't deal a lot in here unless you're doing some packages. So you'll see the current version of firmware. If we refresh, it'll give us the list of firmware here. So it gives us all the different firmwares. So the latest is 16.1.1, and then we can go back a couple versions if we really wanted to. Download, and then, or you can choose a file. If you download it right to your computer, choose a file and upload it, and that'll update the firmware on your node. Typically takes a few minutes to do that, and then it'll reboot, and then you can access your node again in the latest firmware. So same thing here with the package management. You can refresh, look at a bunch of packages to download, or you can if you have one that's right on your computer, you can upload it right from your computer. and same thing with remove package. This will show you what is installed. All these ones that are not grayed out, you can select them and remove them if need be. The other big one down here is support data. This is really important. I suggest that you join the AREDN forums if you have not on the AREDN webpage. And anytime you run into a bug or have an issue that's kind of doesn't make sense to people, which will happen from time to time, they'll ask you to download support data. And this will download a file onto your computer, and you'll be able to take that file and upload it to the forum, and they'll be able to use that, go through it, and see and try to figure out what the actual issue is, either walk you through fixing it or build the fix into the next firmware release if it's not something that can be fixed by a setting change. So we'll go back to our node status, and that brings you back to your dashboard. And we can go to our mesh status, and I saw alright, looks like we're still sitting like that. I saw that our tunnel client was up, but it doesn't appear we have too many additional connections, so I'm just going to drop it a second and bring it back up. So if you disable it, you'll see that the active goes away. We'll refresh here. So now it's inactive, and we can enable it again. Save changes, refresh, and now it's active again. So that's how you would disable and enable your tunnels. So alright, so now we're starting to repopulate our connections. It takes a little while because that OLS R has to go out and basically map the network and anything it can see. So it can take a while, especially if you have a lot of connections. So you see we're starting to populate them up here and get quite a few. I haven't gone through and figured out where everybody is, but I can tell that there's people from different countries, different parts of the U.S., and it's really cool seeing what is and isn't in here, and seeing some of the different things people have put up here. People they make a website that's just got weather information for where they're at. They got their cameras. They have IP camera or IP phones. They have web pages on anything. There's a gentleman on here that's got a web page on building a neon flashing Christmas tree. And there it is. So all kinds of interesting things that can be had across the network, and feel free to explore. So there you have it. Quite a bit of information there in a short period of time. I'll probably be doing some more videos on some of the particular pages in and of themselves, and why and how I've set things up. A lot of information out there, a lot of cool things you can do with this. Feel free to set up your node. Even if you don't have someone to connect to, you can always do a tunnel server to someone else like myself or many other people that are on the AREDN website that are willing to provide connections. A lot of learning, a lot of things that you can explore and see and do. It's a completely new facet of ham radio that's really exciting, and a lot of cool things you can do. So feel free to comment and ask any questions, as well as go check out the AREDN Facebook group, and a lot of good information there, as well as the AREDN website and the forums that they have on there. A lot of very talented people, a lot of people that know a lot about this, a lot more than I do. I'm learning myself, and feel free to ask any questions. So I'll put some links down in the description, and we'll hope to see you next time.